Like the kind of the doghouse.
Sean O'Malley is the new UFC bantamweight champion after finishing Aljamain Sterling in the second round of the main event of UFC 292, and an incredible finish. It was a fight that was quite highly anticipated. A lot of people thought Aljo was going to win, including myself. I didn't think he'd be as domination as what people said, but I felt as if Aljo did have enough to get it done. But I also felt, with Aljo, how sloppy he can be. I could see O'Malley taking advantage of it, and that is exactly what he did. Sean O'Malley landed a beautiful right hand, slipped out of the way, cut at a beautiful angle, and planted it around Aljamain Sterling chin. Aljo tried to recover, but just couldn't. People say it's a late stop or an early stoppage even. Disagree. I think it was the exact same as Adesanya Pereira. There's some stoppages that, they're premature, but then there's some that the referee's kind of saving fighters from their own fate. Mark Goddard as well is very protective of fights, and he tends to jump in early. He did the same thing with Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman, and it is what it is though, because Aljamain Sterling was just lost out there. He looked the first round was quite, I don't want to say boring, but just lackluster. Neither guy was doing much. O'Malley was kind of feeling the range, and I think Aljo was doing the same. For whatever reason, Aljamain Sterling decided not to shoot on Sean O'Malley and try and take him down, which I didn't get at all. And, first round, nothing much, little pot shots here and there. Aljo tried to get a takedown at the end of the round, which probably just about gave him it. But the second round, Aljo starts up quick as he usually does. But, like I said, I felt as if O'Malley could land something on Aljo. And in the second round, Aljo, for whatever reason, hands down, by his chin up in the air, coming straight forward, essentially was asking to be knocked out, and Aljamain Sterling got planted with a beautiful right hand from O'Malley. Sort of just slipped out the way and landed a beautiful, almost somewhat of a pull counter, but more of a extension, a beautiful overhand right, and just sat Aljamain Sterling down, and he just finished him with the ground and pound. Aljamain obviously was getting hit several times, and then he tried to turn over, but then he got hit again, and that's when Mark Goddard stopped the fight. But we have a new champion in Sean O'Malley, and it's the first time since, obviously, Aljo's held the belt for a bit. Obviously, we had the Piotr Jan fight back in 2020. Was it 2020? I'm pretty sure it was, with him and Aljo the first time. The last time we had a champion other than Aljamain Sterling. So, a great win for O'Malley, though. And I think we are maybe about to see a new superstar in the UFC because, Conor McGregor will always be the blueprint of what a fighter has to do in the UFC, I guess. Make noise, knock people out, make it exciting. Khamzat Chimaev is kind of doing his own thing in his own way, so maybe not specifically knocking people out, but I think everybody loves finishes, I like seeing guys go for 12 rounds and 5 rounds and, in both boxing and MMA, but to me, it's not always the greatest, to be honest. I'll be honest, in mixed martial arts, there's rarely ever a fighter I've seen where I enjoyed watching them for all 5 rounds. In boxing, it can be the case because I think boxing's rounds are shorter, even though there are more rounds. And I think, it's just because it's more limited. I guess it's easier to appreciate the art, like a Floyd Mayweather and a Shakur Stevenson and people like that. But in MMA, I'm not really a fan. Didn't really like seeing Volkanovski. He's obviously finished a few guys recently, but beforehand, the fight against Holloway wasn't the greatest, the first one. And then, fights like John Jones's fights against the likes of Reyes and Anthony Smith and Thiago Santos and people like that. Valentin Shevchenko, it's not always great, but you can get the finish. People are going to watch you and find you more entertaining. And I think this was a problem Adesanya had for a while, where guys weren't really coming to fight, and because of that, he wasn't able to get the finishes. But Pereira came to fight in his last fight, and we saw what happened. And I think it's an intriguing one, I will say. How I think people are more interested in the finishes rather than actually the fighter himself. McGregor made his name by knocking everybody out, calling when he was going to do it. Obviously, he was a character. He had the trash talking. He had the fight against Dennis Siver where he jumped over the octagon. I think it was Dennis Siver where he jumped over to confront Aldo. Not told the likes of Dustin Poirier as well and Brando and or Brandao. And then he also obviously fought Shawn Mendes. Then, as well as that bully Jose Aldo won their little press over they had for the fight. Knocked out Shawn Mendes, proved that he was a world champion caliber, and then did the most remarkable thing and knocked out Aldo in 13 seconds, which shook the whole MMA world, I think, and the whole world in general. And these are the things that I think get people excited, these moments. Adesanya had that war with Calvin Gastelum, and then knocks out Robert Whittaker with these in round 2. And then if you look at his last fight, what he was able to do to Pereira after losing 4 times to him, it was just, or 3 times, I should say, the 4th fight they had, knocking him out in the way he did and then doing a little arrow celebration. And yeah, these sort of things, this is what makes fighters great. And I think, to me, Sean O'Malley is in that sort of realm. He isn't as good as talker, I think, as Adesanya or McGregor, but he certainly has that thing about him. And I do like O'Malley. I've said it before. He's probably, at this point, he's probably my favourite fighter to watch in the UFC, simply because I love the striking is so clean from O'Malley. He's so fun to watch, and it's not the type of fun where, like a Justin Gaethje, who is very good in his own right, but he's more wild, more reckless at times. O'Malley's striking is so clean and crisp, and it may be possibly the smoothest striking, I think, in the UFC. The way he mixes it up from, jab to hook to uppercut with right, left. The way he mixes in kicks, the head kicks that he throws, his understanding of range is so underrated. And I think this is why, because he has the hair, people kind of don't think he's serious. But I've always said he's very underrated, O'Malley. And I think what you saw in this fight was him being patient, him knowing when the right time to pull the trigger, because he didn't really throw any crazy shots in the first round to make it out like he was going to knock Aljo's head off, but he waited. And I think we should bide your time in there. You know what's coming. And I think Aljo left himself way too open. At 28 years old, O'Malley, he's still very young in the game, not even in his 30s yet. And I think if he can get a few more fights, if he can fight Chito Vera, he's talking about fighting Tank or Ryan Garcia in boxing. I'd say get a few under your belt before you start calling for those fights. Ngannou obviously is getting a fight with Fury, but I do think that happened after a long time. And Ngannou had put in a lot of work beforehand to get the title shot. And then when he got the title shot, he defended it against Cyril Gane. And he also had the big dispute with the UFC, which I wouldn't recommend. So I don't hate the idea of MMA fighters trying to do boxing and trying to see how they do it there, but I think just wait, bide your time, defending against Chito, defending against Merab, because honestly, Merab would be a horrible fight for O'Malley, but the way Merab shoots, you could probably lands a solid knee up the middle or uppercut. He's a lot more smoother on the feet than Piotr Jan is, O'Malley, and that's why one reason why I think Jan struggled with him at times, and also one reason why I just think he's a horrible fight for a lot of people. I think for Henry Cejudo, it would be a horrible fight, O'Malley. First of all, I think he's got like an 8-inch reach advantage over Cejudo, which is massive, but then O'Malley's clearly been working on his grappling, and I just don't think Cejudo's obviously a gold medalist in the Olympics for wrestling, but he doesn't use that, that rarely ever translates well to mixed martial arts, and you've seen it so many times. Justin Gaethje was supposedly a great wrestler in college, but didn't really show it at the moment. But yeah, a remarkable wonder for O'Malley, and I think he gives Cejudo a lot of promise. I don't think Cejudo would come close to him. Striking wise, they're not even in the same realm, and I said before, I think Cejudo's very good. I just don't think he's as great as what his achievements maybe would suggest. There are still a lot of things in his game where I feel like he's still lacking. And I look at Aljamain Sterling, I don't think it's as simple as, you fight him again, you just wrestle this time. I think Aljamain Sterling's whole thing has been very reckless and wild in there. And the problem is, eventually somebody will figure that out. I always like when fighters have a game plan, I think, for a specific type of fight. Like, for Kamaru Usman, for example, against Gilbert Burns, he specifically chose to strike with him because he knew the jiu-jitsu was very dangerous. But then, against Jorge Masvidal, the fight before, he chose to wrestle. But then, he decided to mix up both of them against Masvidal the second time around because he knew Masvidal would be expecting the takedown. So, I like when fighters prepare, and you can clearly see there's a game plan involved. With Sterling, he does the same thing essentially every time. I've never seen him do anything different, and I think problem is when you do that, eventually there'll be a guy who figures it out. You can't do, I don't think, the same thing every single time and hope for the same result. Eventually, somebody will figure that out, and I'm not saying by any means laid down the blueprint, but what he did is he kind of used Aljo's recklessness against him and just made him miss, and then was able to use his own striking to get it done with his power, that beautiful straight right. And Piotr Jan did a similar thing of using Sterling's aggression against him by just letting him tire himself out and then beating on him for most of the fight. Just obviously need the guy in the head, which you're not supposed to do. and he suffered for it. But I do think in the rematch, I think, or the third fight maybe, I think Yang will still give Sterling problems. But I don't know. It just depends how you fight Aljamain Sterling. I think if you're reckless against him, he will win because he knows exactly what to do in those situations. You can't outfunk the Funk Master, to put it very, very briefly. I don't think you are going to beat him at his own game. I think O'Malley's game plan of being patient was right. Cejudo, I think, struggled because I think Aljo's work rate and the way he pushed him back was Cejudo couldn't handle it. And Cejudo ultimately is a flyweight coming up into bantamweight. And O'Malley, I don't think's ever making flyweight. I know maybe somebody may point and say, oh, he's fought there once, but he's too big. His body is massive. It's probably bigger than... I think they said something about how his leg reach is bigger than the likes of Miocic and Francis Ngannou's or something like that. So his legs are huge. He's got like very, very long legs, and I think that's why his kicks are so effective, and that's why it's so hard to sort of gauge the distance with him. But an incredible win, and I think you got a superstar in your hands. I really do. I think the UFC has struggled for this for a long time. When McGregor's gone, they're not going to have anybody left. He's may as well be gone because he's not fighting anymore, really. We don't know what's happening with him and Michael Chandler, and I think he's at a point now anyway where you can see the glitter's not there anymore. That thing that McGregor hasn't there. He's calling out KSI, in his next fight. So yeah, he hasn't got it. Adesanya could have had it, but Adesanya had a few fights which kind of killed his momentum a little bit. He had the Yoramero fight right after the hype of the Robert Whittaker fight, and he then also had obviously the Paulo Costa fight, which kind of got him back up there. But then the loss against Blachowicz, it's like every time he's built it up Adesanya, he's never been able to sustain it. It's like, be interesting to see if he can do that against Sean Strickland and maybe get into a finish, because that's what he's not done yet. He's never been able to sustain it. It's not his fault. MMA works in different ways. I don't blame him for the boring fights that he's had, because ultimately that's his style, but people don't like that, and that's the problem with Adesanya. I don't think he's too much of a smart fighter to actually take any unnecessary risk, which I think is intelligent. He shouldn't have to take risks, but it is what it is. Whereas McGregor, obviously, he was a bit more of a risk taker. He would fought Nate Diaz at 170 on how many days' notice, going up a weight class. Fought him again and beat him that time, but he takes risks, McGregor, and that's what made him so great. But Adesanya's also taking risks, but it's just not the same type, I think, because in the octagon, McGregor goes to knock your head off regardless who you are, whereas Adesanya he's more intelligent. He knows what's the right game plan. He's almost like a mix of a McGregor and a John Jones, in a way of he's intelligent, he knows what to do in there, but he also can be entertaining when the occasion arises. And I think O'Malley definitely could do that, though. He's got a massive fan base. I know he's friends with like Jared Leto and people like that, so he's definitely got something there. You always see people with these multicolored like wigs in the crowd and stuff. So I think UFC have got a real one with Sean O'Malley. I think it's going to be interesting to see how he does. I think he beats Chito Vera. Him and Merab is probably the toughest one for him. Him and Sandhagen is the one I really want to see, because I mean, stylistically, that's such an intriguing fight. But I think Sandhagen has to fight one of Umar or Merab personally. But it'd be interesting. I don't really see a world where Chito should get the fight over Merab, but because of the history they'll give it him, I think. Obviously, he got the win as well over Pedro Munoz, so in the same card, and I think it's that fight was I won't say a fluke, but I don't think it reflected really what happened in that fight. O'Malley was doing very well, but he just kicked that leg, and then the nerve just wasn't working anymore. But regardless, it was still a good win from Chito. But I think this time around O'Malley will be more prepared, and I think he will. I think he knocks Chito out this second time. That's the thing about O'Malley. I can't remember who's the last guy he's gone to a decision with. I think maybe it might be Jan, to be honest. Maybe his last fight. But if you actually look at most of his fights, he knocks majority of the people out that he's fought. You look at the record here. So obviously his last fight, he beat Aljamain Sterling via TKO. But then he got a decision against Jan, got the no contest against Pedro Munoz. But then after that, he beat Ravlin Paiva via TKO. Obviously beat Chris Moutinho, which sort of got stopped by the referee. Beat Thomas Almeida with a brutal finish. Eddie Violin with a beautiful straight right, Then before that, he beat Jose Quinas with another KO. And look at a lot of these rounds. So from Pavia, round 1 Pavia, round 3 Moutinho, round 3 against Almeida. But then it was round 1 against Violin, round 1 against Quinas. A lot of them are pretty much, obviously, I think that was the first time he fought a 5-rounder on O'Malley, but he is very much a guy who can finish you, whether it's at the end of a fight or at the start. Not many guys have that. McGregor could never beat anybody or knock them out at the end of a fight in a 5-round war. We know if he didn't get you in the first 2, he's not getting you out of there. We've seen this so many times, and yeah, I personally think that O'Malley though has got superstar potential. Adesanya can knock you out at whatever stage, but Vos hasn't really knocked anybody out past the 3rd round recently. Costa was round 2 and Pereira was round 2, but yeah, an intriguing one. This bantamweight division, I think it's my favourite in the UFC, and I think we're getting some real interesting fights on the horizon. We got a new champion, Sean O'Malley. Just my thoughts on UFC 292, and yeah, until next time.